Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we have to talk about a breakthrough video which covers the issue of car break-ins in the city of San Francisco, and this is all thanks in large part to a mainstream YouTuber called Mark Rober, who is best known for glitter bombing people who are trying to steal from him or trying to steal from others in order to teach them a lesson. However, this video goes far beyond your average prank, your average thieves getting effed kind of situation, because it actually exposes a fencing operation that we covered on this channel well over a year ago that the San Francisco Police Department refuses to take down. And honestly, I'd be a bit worried if I were this individual exposing this level of incompetence and corruption from a government like San Francisco. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored, so let me frisbee toss it to the sponsor, then we'll bring it back over here and we'll discuss it on the other side. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a much better way to break your bad habits. And no, I'm not talking about getting futuristic space lasers and blasting yourself in the face until you don't want to do those no-no things anymore. What I'm talking about is today's sponsor, Fume. Fume works on the premise that what you need to do to break a bad habit is keep the habit part, but remove the bad part from it. And Fume is an award-winning device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is all natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. Instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavor cores. I think you get the point. Other things are bad, Fume is good. Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial, it's got magnets and other movable parts for fidgeting, and it's one of the best ways possible for you to take the bad out of your bad habit. On top of that, they got amazing flavors, like crisp mint, maple pepper, orange vanilla, and sparkling grapefruit. And when you try it for yourself, you'll discover that it's actually quite nice. Now, people on my channel already know that Fume is one of the few products that I actually bought one myself before I ended up being sponsored with it, so I do have two on my own for that reason. So you know for a fact it definitely works, but if you want to try it, what you gotta do is go to tryfume.com/actualjustice, or you could scan the QR code on your screen where you can get a 10% discount automatically applied to your next order. And you can also upgrade to the Solano package, where you can get this stunning premium walnut barrel and the onyx black coated mouthpiece that has a smoother finish. And guess what? It's also discounted 10% off. That's tryfume.com/actualjustice, or scan the QR code to get any of these things and start on your Fume journey.
These guys just broke into my car in San Francisco and stole my backpack. But what they'll soon find out is that thanks to some high-tech glitter and fart spray delivery mechanisms, that's no ordinary backpack.
Ain't nobody back here, right?
So I just want to say, even though I am aware of the glitter bomb response to people stealing packages and all of that, I actually don't know if I've ever heard the name Mark Rober, even though he appears to be the person behind him.
Every year, 20,000 cars are broken into in the city of San Francisco. But who's behind all these break-ins? Like, is it organized crime or gangs or just random individuals? And then what happens to all the stuff that they steal?
Now, Rober runs an incredibly successful YouTube channel. He is in mainstream YouTube. He has 28.8 million subscribers. I'm trying to get to 300,000 by the end of this year. This guy is worlds away, 10x above where I am. So it's very interesting to see somebody in normal, everyday kind of YouTube, mainstream YouTube, cover an issue that is down in the dirt, in the nitty-gritty, that places like YouTube don't actually want you to talk about. And that specific issue that is covered in this video is car break-ins in the city of San Francisco. And what's great about this is not only is this video funny, entertaining, clever, but he also partners with a local news reporter who has been fighting back against San Francisco crime. And by the way, we've covered his segments in the past before for a very long time, so it's actually quite informative, and it's a good way to introduce normal people who don't follow this everyday crime reporting like you guys out there in my audience do to this concept, to these problems, and again, to the complete and utter lack of ability for the San Francisco PD and the will from the San Francisco government to address these specific issues.
These guys just broke into my car in San Francisco and stole my backpack. But what they'll soon find out is that thanks to some high-tech glitter and fart spray delivery mechanisms, that's no ordinary backpack.
Ain't nobody back here, right?
And this guy's also trying to break into my car, but what he doesn't realize is those are bulletproof windows, because that's just funny.
Now, on top of that, this video is also incredibly funny. This guy concocts a device that actually uses air to push out a fart spray and glitter onto these thieves because they're breaking into their cars. And in one particular instance, as you just saw, he actually puts bulletproof glass, so you see multiple thieves who encounter the bulletproof glass break become frustrated by the fact that the tools that they bring don't actually help them break in and get what they want to get. So this video is also incredibly entertaining. It will be linked in full in the description. In fact, I'm going to use clips very sparingly from this video so you guys can go out there and watch it, because I think it is important, even though it already has 13 million views and it's already on the trending page 3 days out, which is when I'm shooting this video, for this to gain more views, gain more traction, so that people will continue to talk about this in the mainstream world beyond what we can reach and what we can talk about on this particular channel, because the issue is more important than my own personal glory, which is something that I never thought I said, because it's all about my own personal glory, isn't it?
But who's behind all these break-ins? Like, is it organized crime or gangs or just random individuals? And then what happens to all the stuff that they steal?
So this question is actually really important. Now, to be perfectly fair and scientific and all of that, obviously, the 25 car break-ins that are going to be displayed in this particular video are not going to be a representative sample. As he told you, San Francisco is the car breaking capital of the entire country at 20,000, which is an insane per capita rate per year. But it is interesting for people to see, because they hear a lot about organized crime, that this is everyday criminals that are doing this. They're repeat offending, and the reason they're getting away with it is because they're not being prosecuted. We talked about it a bunch of times on this channel. You cannot send these people to prison in California. You can only send them to county jail. And the thing is, the county jail is full, so they're almost guaranteed a release if and when they're caught. And the organized criminal aspect of it is actually not on the car break-in level. It has to do with these fencing operations, which again means that there are much fewer people involved in the organized portion of this. However, the theft is off the chart. And by the way, we've seen very similar numbers for retail theft, as I've talked about on this channel before.
Out of the gate, it was pretty clear if our goal was to find out who was behind all these car break-ins, they were going to do everything in their power to not be found out. But the advantage of teaming up with an 18-time Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist is that when one of our 8 cameras catches these guys nearly causing an accident, we can play it back so Dan can run their license plate, which must be precisely why they'd removed their license plate.
So one of the interesting things, and by the way, I would have told you this out there in the audience, that you need to look out for when you're on the streets, when you're driving post the Black Lives Matter riots, is all of these vehicles that seemingly operate with either paper plates or no license plate at all, because typically the people in those vehicles are your brazen criminals, those who are trying to commit crimes. And by the way, all of these policies of not pulling people over for minor traffic infractions, like not having your plate on your vehicle, contribute to these criminals acting and going out and recommitting these crimes, because you can't even get them on the basic things like this that would normally prevent a future crime down the road. So right here, you see it is quite common for these vehicles to have no license plates. But the thing is, it used to be if you were driving around without a license plate, you would be pulled over, because in a typical sane, sensible, law-abiding environment, you would be expected to have a license plate on your vehicle.
Thankfully, on our third break-in, our luck improved. And this time, we struck pay dirt. Because once Dan ran the license plate, he made a shocking discovery. Turns out, this car belonged to a longtime SF State College professor who also sits on the board of a prestigious Oakland charter school. And so like any good investigative journalist, Dan found his home address and showed up to confront him. Except he turned out to be a really nice guy who informed us that his license plate was stolen from his car a few weeks prior. And what Dan would eventually learn on nearly all the other license plates he would run over the course of our operation is that not only do the thieves commonly drive around with stolen license plates,
We got Georgia plates.
but they tend to steal from a similar color and model as their own vehicle to avoid an obvious mismatch.
Now, this is also an interesting aspect to the story. The fact that when these vehicles do in fact have license plates on them, the license plates are often stolen from your average everyday citizen, and they're stolen not based on anything except that the plate on that vehicle is the same type of vehicle, so when the cops are behind them, they won't obviously realize the mismatch if that plate were to be run. It's going to take a next level of investigating. So what we have here is that break-ins are so common, so frequent in the city of San Francisco, that in order to participate, in order to engage in these break-ins, they're actually committing a bunch of other crimes that cost average everyday people money, like stealing their license plates, that create a bunch of other problems for law enforcement. enforcement. So what we're seeing right now being exposed by this mainstream YouTuber is the complete and utter pattern of lawlessness that comes from the fact that San Francisco has said they're not going to prosecute essentially this category of crime for a very long time, that people who are convicted of this category of crime aren't going to serve any prison time for it. So what's happening is more and more people are figuring out more and more innovative ways in order to commit this type of crime, which is the car break-in, and there's all these additional tack-on violations that are coming along with it that are creating more and more problems throughout the city. Again, very interesting to see a mainstream YouTuber team up with a local news person, and by the way, we've covered these local news people a lot. Some of them do absolutely wonderful segments, but the truth is most of their segments are getting like 3,000 views if they're lucky, and highlighting this and exposing this to 13 million people.
And we were surprised to learn that more than half of the steals weren't from thieves traveling in cars, but that still leads them to developing their own strategies. For example, this guy here has already scoped out and wants to steal our backpack. The problem is all these people over here would see him. That is, unless he just waits for the perfectly timed obstruction. This guy not only has an official construction worker type vest on, but his technique is to break in on foot, then walk his newfound treasures back to his car, where he can now discreetly lean in through the window to see what he got, which probably works out really well 99% of the time. But it's hilariously the worst possible strategy in this case. Because in the end, he leaves the backpack behind and drives off, having stolen just our fart spray and glitter.
Now, to me, this is where things start to get quite interesting, because what we see is that despite the fact that organized retail theft operations seem to be the thing that's grabbing a lot of the attention, it is actually individuals that are committing these crimes over and over again. Now, I completely disagree with the assessment that these are people who don't typically commit these crimes. That's absolutely ridiculous in my mind.
And to be fair, quite a few of the break-ins were from individuals it would be a stretch to classify as seasoned professionals. For example, this guy tried to use a blowtorch to break the window, which definitely isn't a thing. He eventually finds a screwdriver to snap the edge of the glass, but then realizes he broke the wrong window and the backpack won't fit out. So he goes to unlock and open the door, but now he set off the alarm, so he has to ride off to avoid suspicion with mission unaccomplished. Or there's this guy who spends about an hour tracking the car, pacing back and forth to come up with a plan and work up the courage to make the steal. Only to eventually learn this hopeful life lesson on taking stuff that isn't yours.
You don't get to 20,000 car break-ins, the highest per capita car break-in rate in the entire country, without these street-level criminals repeatedly repeat offending. And I, in fact, watched the footage of these people walking down these lots of all these different cars, checking multiple different doors, multiple different windows, before they decide to target something. These people do this frequently. Oftentimes it's because they're drug addicted.
And I'll start by saying, typically on the news, you'll see organized groups like this, because that just looks really intimidating. But that was much more of a rare occurrence in our experience. More than 80% of our steals were just individuals acting on their own. So like, not some kind of organized gang operation. And a majority of the 80% that were individuals, honestly, didn't seem like they even did this very often.
But what the videos show, in my opinion, and I think it is a little bit underemphasized by Mark Rober, is the fact that these are often crimes of opportunity. They get the chance to commit the crime, they go for it. But they do have the tools on them, typically, to easily break the glass of a car window, which is no easy feat, as he talks about earlier. So to me, this is something they're prepared to do, and they have done before, and the evidence is completely to the contrary of that statement that they don't seem like the criminal types. I guarantee you, if you made any arrests on these individuals, you would find arrest after arrest after arrest in the history, and in my opinion, just because they're not in a car, just because they don't have the license plate stolen thing, just because they don't have that level of organization behind their crime, doesn't mean that they aren't people who typically do things like this. Again, if you feel comfortable enough to steal a suitcase from a car, from a bicycle, you already have the tool to break a car window. I'm sure you're not an emergency rescue worker just going out on a bike ride in your time of day, bringing some of your tools with you, just happen to decide to make the steal. I think you're somebody who repeatedly steals this kind of stuff. On top of that, the GPS information does show to the contrary of what Robert just said there, and this is the part that is going to get him in a little bit of trouble with the city of San Francisco, in my opinion.
So then why are they doing it? Well, as we were trying to figure that out ourselves, we sort of hit a breakthrough on our GPS tracking laptop. Because after it was stolen, it came to this location for about a half a day, but then after that, it made its way over to this neighborhood, and that's where it's been ever since. But the thing is, Dan recognized that first spot, because he did a news report more than a month and a half earlier, when he told the story of a video producer who tracked his stolen gear there because the thieves knew it was a fencing operation where they could quickly exchange the gear for money.
You see, Robo was incredibly intelligent in the way that he conducted this operation. Sure, he had the fun glitter bomb, sure, he had the fart spray and all that, but he put multiple GPS devices in these various bait suitcases, bait laptops, and all that in order to track where they were going. And it turns out they're heading to a known fencing operation. And by the way, if you're a long-term viewer of this channel, you're familiar with this fencing operation because the very local news footage that he's showing was actually covered by me on this channel when it came to this individual who got his camera equipment stolen. So this is a well-known fencing operation to the point that it was on the local news, and you should be absolutely shocked that a month after, which is when this was filmed, it was on the local news. It's still in operation, and it's still a hotspot for people to take this stolen equipment.
He's on the phone with a San Francisco police officer when he sees his camera gear arrive at this location in the 300 block of Leavenworth.
And he goes, oh yeah, that's a known major fencing operation. Everybody in the Bay Area knows that they can bring their stolen goods and offload them there.
And this, again, is what I think flies in the face of Rober's assertion that the people who are committing these crimes, the people who are doing this stealing, aren't people who look like they typically commit the crimes. Even if they're not organized, or they seem broke, or they seem like drug addicts, they appear to know where the fencing operation is, and to me, that denotes a level of experience that he is just not giving these criminals credit for. But more shockingly is the fact that the San Francisco PD knew and commented on this fencing operation as of the local news segment a month before this was filmed, and yet we have still not heard of this raid on this fencing operation.
And look, there's a whole host of things that leads to 20,000 cars per year getting broken into and people taking stuff that isn't theirs. And some of the core issues down here are super complicated and require nuance and public policy to address. But right below people stealing from cars are these fencing markets.
So right here, Mark is talking about how there are root causes and there are things that lead to these car break-ins, but the thing is, if you have an outlier in terms of criminality, what you need to look for, in my opinion, is an outlier in terms of policy. San Francisco's car break-ins are not atypically high, they're the highest in the entire country, car break-in capital of this nation. So to me, you gotta look for the undergirding policy that supports this. Now, a lot of this started during Chesa Boudin's reign, and San Francisco was going out of their way to not prosecute these types of crimes. On top of that, San Francisco does not target people who are seriously addicted to drugs that are living on the streets. So you have a population that is growing, they're getting ever more addicted to drugs, ever more desperate for money, and that compounds with the lack of prosecution to lead to a situation where your goods are quite vulnerable. Remember, we saw video after video very early on in the pandemic and even before the pandemic of San Francisco residents that left their cars open on the hopes that the homeless people would not break their glass, and this was years ago, in order to get the goods in their car. So we have a population that is highly drug addicted. They're not being prosecuted for crimes, and on top of that, when they are prosecuted for crimes, the state of California does not allow you to throw even repeat offenders in prison if they deem them to be non-violent felons. Remember, we covered that break-in story where a guy was convicted of 76 felony burglaries. These were commercial burglaries in a business, and they couldn't send him to prison, so he was out in a couple of months. Those were felony burglaries. Most of these car break-ins are misdemeanors, so if you can't punish people for felony thefts with prison time, imagine how powerless you are for these misdemeanor thefts. On top of that, like I said, you have all those other things that are unique to San Francisco that make it stick out, that also compound and add to these problems. So to me, it's not that complicated. It does require public policy in order to fix it, and when you, again, have an issue of an outlier city, you gotta look look for outlier policies, and I think those policies are very present in the city of San Francisco.
But right below people stealing from cars are these fencing markets. There's a demand for these stolen goods, so it feels like shutting down these markets and not having a place to exchange stolen goods for money so incredibly easily would go a long ways to stopping car break-ins. This is also why you see people stealing things like soap and toiletries from a place like Walgreens. The thief doesn't need that much soap, but when he knows he can easily turn it into real money in less than an hour, you eventually get stores that look like this, or just permanently have to shut down altogether. And I can't imagine I'm telling the city something they don't already know, but when you have a public news report about a spot apparently everyone knows you can go to sell stolen items, and then 1.5 months later, my laptop goes to the exact same spot to be sold, it certainly feels like more could be done here to remove the incentive for the break-ins and store thefts to occur in the first place.
Now, to me, this right here is where this video elevates to another level, because there's actually plenty of educational value and entertainment value throughout the course of this video. There's a lesson on tempered glass used for car windows and all that. That's interesting to me as somebody who can get a little bit nerdy and want to know about things randomly when I'm consuming content. But overall, this is the heart of the issue right here. You have all these fencing operations, and we've covered them on this channel. Sometimes they'll raid a warehouse full of stolen goods, $8 million in the San Francisco area, that are well known to the police. Some of them have been publicized to the point where they're on the local news, and yet they're not being shut down. I mean, some people steal stuff from these stores, then they set up tables 2 blocks away with those very goods, and yet there are no arrests. And this is where Rober is going to get himself into a little bit of trouble, because it's one thing for this to go on, for it to be covered by right-wing YouTube, for it to be covered on Twitter, for it to be covered by even Tucker Carlson, but it's another thing for a mainstream YouTuber, an engineer, to break this down in such a concise way for the general public to react to.
But when you have a public news report about a spot apparently everyone knows you can go to sell stolen items, and then 1.5 months later, my laptop goes to the exact same spot to be sold, it certainly feels like more could be done here to remove the incentive for the break-ins and store thefts to occur in the first place.
And that's where I'm a little bit worried for Mr. Rober, because another pattern that we've seen is not only the dereliction of duty of left-wing cities, their prosecutors, their police, and all of that, but when you expose that, when you fight back against the criminal, then the consequences come for you. So while this video is incredibly entertaining, fart spray and glitter can't get much more fun than that, you also open yourself up for a potential prosecution, especially if you anger the district attorney, anger the powers that be, by exposing their complete and utter indifference to criminality in their major cities. So, while we might laugh and say, oh look, he designed this whole device and all that, you could potentially charge him with constructing a fake bomb. In fact, one of the suspects in this particular instance described it as a fake bomb, which, by the way, is in fact a crime.
So the car thieves showed they could handle our cameras and investigative techniques, but now the question was, how would they handle a little bit of harmless glitter? Spoiler alert, not very well.
Oh no! That's a tracker. No, see that's a tracker. I'm trying to. Right here.
On top of that, the fart spray, all fun, totally harmless and all that, but you could charge them with a chemical weapon and a delivery device for that chemical weapon. The same is true with the distribution device for the glitter.
And I feel it's very important to point out here that this fart spray is perfectly harmless to breathe. It just truly smells really, really bad.
So while Rober is saying that this is the last video in the series and the general population enjoys it, they find it educational and entertaining, in reality, as somebody who's been covering these kind of district attorney's offices before, I know that the thing that they hate most is not criminality, but exposing their complete and utter incompetence or indifference to that criminality. So Mark Rober might get an experience that he was not expecting from doing this video, from telling the truth, that is usually reserved for people defending themselves against criminals, and that would be very interesting to see if he were to be put in that scenario. Now, I'm rooting for him for that not to happen. I'm hopeful that it won't due to the size of his channel, but embarrass these people a bunch of different times in public, and eventually they're going to figure out something to charge you with. They're going to find a way to come after you, and we've seen that pattern over and over again. But overall, this video is great. It's fantastic. I highly recommend you watch it in full. It is educational throughout, and credit where credit is due, Rober exposed this in a way that my dozens of videos on the topic just will not be able to reach in terms of audience. And he did so to people that are not generally interested in criminality in this type of reporting. And he did it in an entertaining way and in a way that I think will stick with a lot of people. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the complete and utter craziness in San Francisco. Till next time.